Hey, what's happening guys, Kris here, bringing you another episode of Battlefield 5 Weapon Versus, where I basically stick two guns side by side and run over all of those stats, making comparisons along the way. In this video, we're going to be focusing on two of the recon class's fairly aggressive self-loading rifles. Two weapons which you'll also be pretty familiar with if you play Battlefield 1, where they were both featured in the medic class. The first gun is the Remington Model 8, a rifle made by John Browning in the early 1900s, which was pretty popular amongst hunters, and was even used by the British Home Guard in World War II. The second gun is the RSC, a French service weapon developed in 1917, chambered to use the same cartridge as the Lebel bolt-action rifle. These two weapons are considered to be some of the recon class's more offensive options, that are typically designed to perform better over a close to medium range, unlike a lot of the other guns in the class, that mainly cater to people who want to snipe over longer distances. Both the Model 8 and the RSC function in a pretty similar way because of this, sharing a lot of the same sort of traits and some of the same stats. But there's still quite a lot of comparisons to be made here, because at the end of the day, they are different weapons, with their own properties, strengths and weaknesses, allowing one weapon to excel in a certain way over the other, giving it more of a reason to be chosen instead. I'm going to be giving you all the key information you need to know about these guns, running over all of those main similarities and differences as we go along, and hopefully by the end you'll be able to decide which gun fits into your playstyle the most, or at least you'll know a little bit more about how they compare. So first of all, let's find out which rifle is going to be the most dominant in terms of kill times. There isn't really a hell of a lot to compare regarding damage stats, because both guns are going to dish out the exact same values, despite the fact that they use a different cartridge. They've got a maximum damage of 52, which can be retained right the way up to 49 meters, and it's here where that damage is going to start to drop off. Rather than gradually losing power, the damage is essentially going to slide off a cliff, reducing quite rapidly over a fairly short distance, to the point where at 75 meters, you're going to hit the minimum damage of 38. So there's a pretty sudden drop in stopping power beyond 50 meters, turning the guns from a 2-shot kill up to a 3. And this is going to drastically increase their kill times beyond medium range, perhaps making them less ideal than other recon weapons for taking on players further away. Self-loading rifles actually have the smallest headshot multiplier in the game, apart from the buckshot firing shotguns, and because a bullet to the noggin is only going to deal an extra 1.7 times damage, this prevents both the Model 8 and the RSC from being able to cut down their kill times by planting headshots within 50 meters, making them a bit less relevant within shorter sight lines. They're still going to knock a pretty mean chunk out of your enemy's health bar, and if that enemy's already been injured, then you're much more likely to take them down in one hit. But you're only really going to benefit from that extra headshot damage if your target is beyond 50 meters, where it would otherwise take 3 bullets to kill, as it'll reduce it back down to a 2-shot kill, and therefore allow you to deal with ranged targets a little bit easier, helping to make up for that lower power over distance. Another thing that's also practically the same between the two rifles is rate of fire, with both the Model 8 and the RSC shooting at a fairly decent speed of 180 RPM, usually enough to make them seem quite deadly within those early mid-ranges. But the Model 8 can potentially have the advantage here, with it having access to the trigger job specialization, unlike the RSC. And that's going to nicely ramp it up to 200 RPM, roughly giving it a 10% boost. This will allow it to kill a little bit quicker over all distances, but will probably feel more beneficial within closer quarters, where you'll be able to take on those fully automatic weapons a tad easier, allowing the Model 8 to be a slightly more aggressive rifle than the RSC in some scenarios. So moving on, let's talk a bit more about those accuracy stats. Just like with the other self-loading rifles, both the Model 8 and the RSC are practically going to have no horizontal drifting as you open fire, with them having horizontal recoil figures of 0, which is very nice. This pretty much makes them both super accurate weapons, that aren't going to kick around from side to side as you shoot. But the one thing that is going to affect that precision is the vertical recoil value, basically the amount of upwards kick that the guns are going to be subjected to every time a bullet flings out of them. The higher the vertical recoil, the less stable the weapon's generally going to be, and in this case it's the RSC that's got the nastier value, with a vertical kick reading of 1.6, so slightly more than the Model 8's 1.4 value. It's not exactly a drastic difference, but it's still enough to impact the gun's performance, making it a tad less controllable. And this just might make it slightly harder to use, especially over further distances where that higher kick will probably seem more noticeable. This same behaviour can be said for the weapon's vertical recoil increase values too, which is basically just some extra recoil that's added on per shot fired, making the guns even less controllable the quicker you tap the trigger. And once again, it's the RSC that's going to be impacted by this the most. This means that you might have to pace your shots out slightly more so with the RSC, shooting a tad slower to account for these negative factors, and that's probably going to reduce its kill times against longer ranged players. Whereas the Model 8 will probably be able to stay on target a tad easier as you shoot at the gun's maximum rate, possibly making it more ideal for taking down enemies over those later mid-ranges. There is one thing that can make life a bit easier here for both weapons, reducing the vertical recoil and vertical increase values to give the guns better stability, probably making them feel more effective for longer range fights. And that thing is the recoil buffer, dropping the RSC's vertical value down to 1.28 and the Model 8's value to a lower 1.12. But because both guns are going to be affected by this specialization in the exact same way, with it lowering vertical kick down by 22%, the Model 8 still technically has the advantage, with it having the potential to beat the RSC. One last characteristic that's probably going to give the Model 8 a slight range advantage is the fact that it's blessed with a higher muzzle velocity of 660 meters per second instead of 630, allowing its bullets to travel a little bit quicker through the air. Not exactly a huge difference, but still enough to make it feel more effective and easier to use over mid-ranges, as you won't have to lead the target's movements quite as much as they're running around further away, and so this is another thing to improve its precision over the RSC, possibly giving it even more appeal. Now, so far, the Model 8 is pretty much dominating this comparison with its stronger statistics, generally being a more precise gun that has the ability to shoot a tad faster. But this is where the RSC finally gets to show off its better qualities, because it's a far more reliable weapon as a whole, compared to the Model 8. The RSC holds an extra 6 bullets, unlike the Model 8 which can only carry 5, and this potentially allows it to kill another player, with it often taking 2 hits to take them down within closer to medium ranges. The Model 8 can only reliably drop 2 enemies with a fully loaded mag, whereas the RSC is capable of killing up to 3, unless those enemies have already been injured first, meaning you'll probably be able to take down even more. One extra round might not sound like a game changer, but in this case it's going to be a much bigger deal, with the 2 guns only holding a very limited amount of ammo, and because their bullets are quite powerful, they're going to have a lot more importance in gunfights. Ammo capacity isn't the only advantage the RSC has over the Model 8 here though, as because its rounds are loaded into the underside of the gun's receiver, using clips only, rather than it being fed individual cartridges, this essentially speeds up its reloads, making them a lot quicker than the Model 8's. The RSC's tactical reloads are only going to take 2.85 seconds to perform, 2.42 seconds if you've got that quick reload spec enabled, and its empty reloads are only going to be slightly slower, lasting 3.3 seconds normally, or 2.8 seconds with that specialization. So some fairly snappy times overall, especially in comparison to the other self-loading rifles. The Model 8 on the other hand is going to leave you waiting around a bit more in between those reloads, as you'll have to manually top the magazine up with individual bullets if you perform a tactical reload, or if you've covered the top of the receiver with a scope. And this is going to take anywhere between 3.1 to 5.6 seconds to do, depending on however many rounds need to be replaced. Of course, just like with the RSC, this can be sped up a bit with that quick reload specialization, but it's still going to take between 2.64 to 4.76 seconds to slot in 1 to 5 bullets nevertheless, which is still generally a fair bit slower than the RSC. If you're running with those iron sights or shorter ranged optics, then you'll be able to utilise the gun's 5-round clips when you've emptied that magazine, and these clip reloads are typically going to take less time to perform. They give the Model 8 empty reload times of 3.9 seconds, or about 3.2 seconds with that specialization. But this isn't quite as swift as the RSC, meaning it's not going to be quite as dependable when you get caught with your pants down, surrounded by a bunch of enemies that want to kill you. This might allow the RSC to keep you engaged in the fight a little easier, especially when you're using offensive tactics closer to the front line, as the Model 8 will usually put you in more vulnerable positions, making it more of a risk-reward kind of weapon that can often feel more effective and easier to use, but at the trade-off of being a less reliable gun overall. So which gun should you choose? Both the Model 8 and the RSC are very deadly mid-range self-loading rifles that have a lot of power within those earlier distances to make them great choices for taking on enemies a tad closer to the action, working quite nicely with passive-aggressive playstyles. They play out in the same sort of way as each other, but still have a few pretty big pros and cons to define them as individual weapons that are going to make them seem better at doing certain things in certain situations. The Model 8 is generally going to feel like an easier gun to use, perhaps being a better option for slightly longer range fights. This is mainly due to it having that faster bullet speed and lower vertical recoil, so it will probably seem like less of a struggle to hit targets dashing around over medium ranges. It's still not exactly a brilliant weapon for sniping with, due to it having a lower power output over distance, just like with the RSC, but it can typically deal with players further away without as much hassle, as you'll be able to take full advantage of the gun's ability to fire faster, all whilst being able to stay on target more easily too, having the better precision. These factors combined give the Model 8 a lot of effectiveness over all ranges, but despite it doing quite a few things better than the RSC, it's definitely going to be a trickier thing to handle within closer ranges, or in situations where you need to take care of a few enemies one after the other. This is all due to it being a far less reliable weapon, holding less bullets and reloading much slower, making it a very risky but rewarding gun to use, often forcing you to seek out cover more often and play a little bit less aggressively, with it putting you in a lot more sticky situations. The RSC is practically the opposite in this sense, as it can handle quite well under pressure, and so can feel like a more dependable option to use, closer to all the danger, where it's not going to be impeded quite so much by its lower muzzle velocity and heavier vertical kick. It's still a gun designed for early mid-ranges, just outside of close quarters, where the automatic weapons and shotguns are generally going to be superior. But at the same time, just like the Model 8, the RSC still isn't the best tool for longer range sniping, due to it often taking free shots to kill further away. And with it having the worst precision stats, this is yet another reason why it might not be as effective for taking on players far into the distance. The RSC might feel a bit harder to use, and it might not seem to kill quite as quickly, due to you having to fire slower to account for its heavier kick, and lead targets more if they're moving around, possibly equating to more missed shots. But bullets are going to seem a bit more expendable, with the gun holding more of them and replacing them at quicker rates. So missing shots won't be quite as problematic, with the RSC giving you more chances to get the job done, being the much more reliable choice. So that's it for another one, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video and learned a few things along the way. Subscribe and click the bell to stay informed of all new content coming out in the future, and most of all, thanks for watching. Take it easy, and I'll see you in that next episode.